Thank you. This morning, we are pleased to be joined by ethical culture leader Greg Bonin. Greg specializes in institutional and organizational facilitation, bringing a practice grounded in embodiment, humanistic interdependence, and reflective inquiry as a method for lifelong formation. Their talk today is titled Joy is an Act of Resistance. Greg.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that introduction, and thank you, Rollin, for the lovely music earlier. That was beautiful. As was said, my name is Greg Bonin, and you are welcome to use all pronouns with me. I am joining you from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, though I typically reside in Arlington, Virginia, just across from DC. And Hugh Taft Morales has been a longtime mentor for me, so I was glad to receive Betsy's invitation to speak with you today and share some of my story. Today's platform is going to be somewhat interactive, and if you're not used to that, or this is something you weren't expecting, I hope you'll participate as an experiment in something new. Inquiry and embodiment are two practices that inform my worldview, and I'll be inviting you both explicitly and implicitly into both practices today throughout my talk. I actually love that you start with a moment of silent centering. I haven't seen that in a lot of the other societies yet, so I very much appreciate that. And to start here today, I'd actually like to invite you into a guided moment of body awareness. And everything in this moment is an invitation. You know your body best, so only accept the invitations that are right for you. And if it helps to give yourself permission to become present, you can close your eyes and just take a few full breaths. Fill your lungs if you can, and if that's comfortable for you. And with each breath, settle into your seat just a little more. Rest your back and rest your feet. Maybe rest your arms. Let your seat hold your body and let the floor hold your feet or your wheels. As you continue breathing, just check in with your body. How does your body feel in this moment? Just notice what's there. What sensations are you feeling? You check in with your feet, up your legs and to your hips, your belly and through your chest, your shoulders and your arms, your neck, up to the back of your head, and then your face. Now rest your body's focus on a central point, and that might be your head or your chest or your belly, whatever is calling for your attention in this moment. As you inhale, breathe into that place in your body. And as you exhale, breathe out from that same place. Now check in with your heart. What are you feeling in this moment? How's your heart right now? What emotions are present for you? And you might be feeling more than one. Maybe there's a story that's emerging for you. Just acknowledge that story and continue breathing. Whatever you're experiencing right now, it's okay. What you're experiencing is valid. This story is part of you, but it is not the whole of you. You are more than any one story. Wherever you are, come back to your breath. Notice the sensation of your lungs filling And then notice the sensation of your breath leaving your body. And when you're ready, take 1 or 2 full breaths. Gently open your eyes and return to the room in this shared space together. Because what I believe comes from my body's stories, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and my humanism. I'm the most recently certified ethical culture leader with the American Ethical Union, and I'm also dually affiliated as a candidate for ministerial fellowship with the Unitarian Universalist Association. And Unitarian Universalism is a liberal, pluralistic religious movement that shares many characteristics with ethical culture. And if you read the AAU weekly update this week, you may also know that I've been hired as the new Director of Administration and Organizational Culture. So I'm excited to serve the union and the movement in this role, and I look forward to supporting what will unfold in the next year. Like ethical culture, Unitarian Universalism does not demand we live according to a religious creed. Instead, shared principles and sources from pluralistic traditions serve as inspirations for living our best lives. One of these sources is humanism, and the description for that source of inspiration reads as humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. An ethical culture is a religious humanist movement. I believe that both of these designations are important, that we claim both a religious identity and a humanistic identity, and that'll come up a little later. So what is humanism? Humanist Richard Norman says, there is no definitive set of beliefs called humanism. There are many humanisms. And I think this is true, especially when we looked at lived humanism. So my humanism has 5 key beliefs. 1, this is the only life I have, and I am responsible for its condition. All humans have the potential for both great good and great evil. Humans and human concerns are only one part of a vast, interdependent natural universe. The universe is amoral, and I must commit to constructing moral value. And life can have meaning with or without a god or gods. And I hold an agnosticism or skepticism towards supernatural claims. Another way of saying all of that is that we are all we've got. And in order for humanism, especially religious humanism, to offer a substantive orienting worldview today, the question it must answer is, what is going to keep me going at 3 a.m. when I'm wide awake and devastated? I'm going to tell you a little of my story, which is only one story of how one kind of humanism is lived. I'm going to tell you about how I ended up in ethical culture and Unitarian Universalism. And because any story is influenced by the identities we hold and the markers of our social location, I want to name that some of my own markers include lower middle class, white proximate, Gen X, middle-aged, non-theistic, queer, male presenting, mostly able-bodied, college-educated, child-free, English-speaking, and American. I grew up in southern New England, and as a youth, I attended a Catholic elementary school and a New England Baptist church. Then in high school, I attended an unaffiliated charismatic evangelical church, participated in mission trips, and prepared to attend a Christian Bible college. That last church taught their own exclusivist interpretation of the Bible. For me, that meant that the only right relationship I could have with folks outside the church was an active attempt to bring them into the exclusivity of that church. So I proselytized to my classmates for almost 4 years, and as you can imagine, I was quite popular. In my last year of high school, as I started actually spending time with folks outside of the church, I found that the church's teachings didn't align with my own experiences and deepening relationships. So I severed my ties with that church. And this was a big decision at the time because the teachings and community of this church had provided a framework that oriented me to the universe and the people in it. It helped me make sense of the world. And this framework insisted that my existence relied upon an ultimate supernatural divinity according to a restrictive interpretation of Christianity. In other words, the only truth was God, capital G, and conservative evangelical Christianity. Faced with evidence that, at the very least, this framework did not have room for the truths that were emerging for me, I abandoned that framework. Leaving that church meant that my whole understanding of the universe collapsed. So you might imagine that when I arrived at college, I had questions. I soon stumbled upon two philosophies, existentialism and phenomenology, that gave me some reasonable tools to begin exploring some of the more profound questions I was asking myself at the time. Existentialism's focus on human experience helped me reframe my values in a way that made sense to me. That is, the ability to live a life ethically without supernatural justification. And phenomenology suggested new ways for me to examine and make meaning from my experiences. Together, they provided me with an inward-looking and outward-seeking way to navigate relationships and interpret my experiences. Their emphasis on personal responsibility and social accountability rang true with how I understood myself to be interconnected with nature and society. Although I didn't have language for it at the time, this was my gateway to humanism. In my 30s, something fundamental shifted for me. I think of this period of my life as a dark night. And a dark night is more fully called a dark night of the soul, and it's often used with religious or spiritual connotations. It refers to a period of significant doubt that can lead to questioning the certainties that shape our world. My understanding of the world was failing me, and I had to find new ways to move through it. A dark night is a primal deconstruction and reconstruction of how we understand ourselves, and it can feel mythic. Saturn returns is an astrological term that marks the time when the planet Saturn is in the same place that it was when I was born. That's about 29 years, the time it takes for Saturn to orbit the sun. So Saturn is just reeling around, getting all up in my face and demanding that I reckon with how I had lived in the world. And suffice to say, Saturn is not gentle. Even though I identify as atheistic today, these ideas continue to serve as rich metaphors for describing this period in my life. They resonate with me as descriptors because the dark night reflects my experience as a human body in the world, and Saturn returns literally marks a place in my lifetime that situates me within the cyclical rhythm of the universe. I loved philosophy because I loved playing with ideas and concepts. But during these visceral experiences, ideas were not enough. I think if I had insisted on clinging, white-knuckled, pun intended, to my philosophies during that period of my life, they would have become the idolatries of the mind and spirit named in Unitarian Universalism's short description for humanism. And I am grateful that I did not. I began to relax my focus on concepts and began applying philosophy to human activity. In other words, I shifted from a theory of humanism to a praxis of humanism. To live into this shift, I sought communities that could make space for the biggest questions that were emerging from my experience of being a body in this world. And if you're in conversation with me for more than a few minutes, you'll notice that I talk a lot about what it means to be a body. That's because I believe that our bodies are our whole human selves. Another way to say this is that our bodies are our soul or our spirit. Over the next 10 years, I participated and worked with community groups that helped me live into some of the answers to my questions. The most impactful of those groups offered a community movement and dance practice that invited folks to express their body stories through nonverbal, free-form, whole body movement while immersed in music. This practice quickly became important to me because I was having a singular, overwhelming, ineffable experience And this is a place where I could let go of words and express my experience with my body. Throughout my life, music has consistently inspired awe and wonder, a way to feel connected to others and the world. And dancing to music with other bodies in a shared space while expressing my Dark Night and Saturn Returns carried me into a place that felt transcendent. Being in a movement practice grounded me in my body in a way that playing with ideas never could. And I continued my practice even after leaving that community. Like my exploration of existentialism and phenomenology, body movement became a humanist practice for me. It's a visceral way of living into we are all we've got, embracing responsibility for the condition of my one life by co-constructing meaning and moral value within an interdependent community. Being connected to community is important to me because I believe that congregating is one way we actualize human interconnection within the natural universe. Congregating provides a rhythm that helps orient our days and marks the passage of time, inviting us to share witness of life's milestones. And perhaps most importantly, congregating is a way for us to understand how our bodies are in relationship with one another, both personally and socially. Around the time I turned 40, I began exploring ethical culture at the Ethical Humanist Society of Asheville. And a few years later, I began learning more about Unitarian Universalism while attending Meadville Lombard Seminary. Together, Unitarian Universalism and ethical culture offered me a humanistic framing for understanding our interdependence. And like my movement practice, both offer communities of practice where I can journey alongside folks who are also seeking to construct moral value with this only life we have. In my ongoing exploration of ethical culture and Unitarian Universalism, I always return to curiosity and inquiry. And taking a cue from Rainier Maria Rilke, I try to love the questions. It's not always easy, but I try. And lately I've been asking two questions in particular. What kind of bodies and experiences does this space represent? And what bodies are invited to flourish here? And these questions connect me to my practice of queerness, which has been at the heart of my humanism for the past few years. My queerness asks the critical question, how can we flourish, as a way to contextualize how I myself might flourish? And if we understand humanism as we are all we've got, then this is the question. If we can begin to answer this question, we might begin to know what is going to keep us going at 3 in the morning when we are wide awake and devastated. And for me, some answers to that question reside in how I connect with natural beauty, how I situate myself within communities of practice, like ethical culture societies, and perhaps most importantly these days, learning how to access joy. One answer to the question of our survival and flourishing is that joy is not a frivolous luxury. Joy is necessary. Poet Toi Derricotte wrote a series of poems grieving the death of her fish. These are entitled The Telecycle, and the extended title includes the line, "Joy is an act of resistance." Why would a Black woman need a fish to love? Why did she need a flash of red living in the corner of her eye? As if she could love nothing up close, but had to step away from it, come back to drop a few seeds and let it grab onto her as if it caught her on some hook that couldn't hurt. Why did she need a fish? A red thorn, or among the thorns, that flower? What does her love have to do with 500 years of sorrow? Then joy, coming up like a small breath, a bubble. What does it have to do with the graveyards of the Atlantic in her mother's heart? I spent about a decade working and volunteering with local nonprofits in Asheville, North Carolina. These were service-oriented nonprofits that offered racism education, body movement as spiritual practice, and spiritual exploration for queer and gay men, among other things. What I learned from this work is that we are interdependent, that our inherent dignity and worth, the qualities of our human relations, our spiritual growth, our global community, are all held within our interdependence. I am especially interested in human relationships as part of our interdependence. One of my favorite descriptions of honorable human relationships comes from feminist and poet Adrienne Rich. She writes, an honorable human relationship, that is, one in which two people have the right to use the word love, is a process, delicate, violent, often terrifying to both persons involved, a process of refining the truths they can tell each other. It is important to do this because it breaks down human self-delusion and isolation. It is important to do this because in doing so, we do justice to our own complexity. It is important to do this because we can count on so few people to go that hard way with us. For years, I looked to this kind of hard way as an ultimately meaningful description that comprised the whole work of human relationships. The hard way built a personal foundation for me to participate in collective resistance through relationship building. And it made this resistance worthwhile for me. That hard way moved me toward a solidarity and allyship that was grounded in embodiment, liberation, and justice. In short, the hard way was good work. As I continued working in different community resistance projects, I repeatedly found myself joyless, depleted, and sometimes devastated. Who wouldn't be depleted by a process that can be delicate, violent, and often terrifying to both persons involved, even when it leads to expansively rich and beautiful relationships? While Adrienne Rich's hard way accurately described the risk and vulnerability required to grow an honorable human relationship, it was missing a source of nourishment that could sustain such work. As I was searching for a source of nourishment, I started leaning into queerness. My understanding of queerness comes from womanist author and queer ancestor Bell Hooks. She has described queerness as being about the self that is at odds with everything around it. The self that has to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. Again, queer as being about the embodied self that is at odds with the systems of power around it, and inventing and creating and finding a place to speak and to thrive and to live. This is a queerness that asks not only what is needed to survive, but what is needed to flourish as a body in the world, our particular bodies, as we negotiate systems of violence, oppression, and exploitation. I remember being struck the first time I heard this during a particularly joyless period of devastation. Her description of queerness implied that thriving is necessary to continue resisting. She opened up the possibility for me that joy isn't a frivolous luxury, but a necessity. Hook's queerness connected to Adrienne Rich's hard way by acknowledging the reality that we are sometimes at odds with everything around us, and yet insisting that we create new spaces to thrive, even in the face of overwhelming resistance to our dignity and worth. Joy is an act of resistance. This is the title of the Toi Derricotte poem that I read earlier. In my personal reading of the poem, I hear Derricotte noticing, suddenly, a thriving and living amongst doubt and devastation. As she names it, I hear joy. It's not an exhilarating, ephemeral, or disconnected joy like the joy we're often sold in advertisements that promise happiness. It's a joy that surfaces from human fragility and propels the poet through the remainder of the poem. This kind of joy has an inextricable, direct relationship with experiences of devastation and terror. It's a joy that allows her to endure. Author Sharon Welch summarizes this direct relationship between joy and pain in her assertion that we cannot numb our pain at the degradation of life without also numbing our joy at its abundance. And that's worth repeating, so I'm going to say it again. We cannot numb our pain at the degradation of life without also numbing our joy at its abundance. There's a kind of joy that's described by all of the women I've named this morning, who have contributed to my personal framework for endurance. I think of this joy as durable joy, and I believe that durable joy has a significant role in renewing our ability to resist lifelong, ongoing depletion and devastation. Toward the end of Derricotte's lament for her fish, Telly, there are a few lines where devastation and joy intermingle. She writes, "Why did she need a fish, a red thorn, or among the thorns, that flower? What does her love have to do with 500 years of sorrow?" Then joy, coming up like a small breath, a bubble. This is the place where durable joy resides. Durable joy embraces that we are both simply mourning the death of a fish and also that we are connected to an expansive history that we cannot possibly hope to contain in any single moment. It connects us with something bigger than us that is also wholly us. The invitation into durable joy is sometimes small and easy to overlook, like a small breath, a bubble, or a favorite song that makes you sing out loud. The effervescence of your friend's irrepressible smile, or the peaceful majesty of mountains on the distant horizon. For me, it was the Blue Ridge Mountains in Asheville where I could wander when the world was just wrong. Knowing that their immense beauty existed in spite of my devastating circumstances connected me with something that was more than just myself. They were here before me, and they will be here after I'm gone, and that persistent, durable perspective lent me a sense of subtle joy. I invite you to take a moment right now and bring one of your own joys to mind. Maybe a song, maybe a person who has journeyed alongside you, or something else deep in your bones, a joy that you've already lived into. And I'll wait a few moments as you bring that to mind. As you recall this joy, notice what your body does. Maybe it lightened or relaxed a little. Maybe it expanded just enough to make space for something more. I'm drawing attention to our bodies because durable joy emerges from our particular experience of being a body in this world. As bodies, we navigate systems of power that attempt to regulate our dignity and worth. And that regulation is often exploitative and oppressive. As I mentioned earlier, part of my experience as a body navigating these systems includes that I'm a white adjacent, male presenting, and mostly able-bodied, among other things. These markers have a material impact on how my body interacts with the system of power I keep referencing. How my body is marked places me more or less proximate to power within these systems, and my belief in our interdependence compels me to acknowledge this. Durable joy can sustain us in the lifelong personal and collective work of resisting detrimental systems of power. These systems will try to reduce us and delude us into believing that our dignity is not worth our resistance. They will try to isolate us, and we must refuse to be isolated. We must find ways to risk moving beyond our isolation and moving toward personal and collective joy. And I want to be crystal clear. The sources for durable joy that come from our experiences as bodies in this world are legitimate. And they're legitimate because they are grounded in our inherent worth, which cannot be reduced. When I say that joy is an act of resistance, I am saying that durable joy resists the regulation of our dignity and worth by insisting that these are inherent and irreducible qualities of our person and of every person. Durable joy can hold us when we experience the desolation of our human fragility, and when we are transcendently ecstatic, and every experience in between. It's the kind of joy that can acknowledge 500 years of sorrow and still call us back into life. In closing, I want to reiterate that my understanding of humanism is not definitive. It's only what I've found useful so far. My humanism comes from my particular story, and it's only one story. I hope you will hear my story as an invitation to consider your own story about being a body in the world and how humanism might inform your understanding of your own story and your sources for joy. Sometimes life can feel like endless resistance. To endure, we must know and remember our sources for durable joy. So I ask you this afternoon, where does your joy come from? What are your sources of durable joy? Who and what can you call on in your moment of need when your own acts of resistance have depleted you? What is going to keep you going at 3 a.m. when you're wide awake and devastated? And maybe your joy comes from the intimacy of relationships, or the beauty of nature, or the wonder and ecstasy of artistic expression. And maybe it comes from something small that only your own body remembers. Whether you're in a peaceful place or a place of desolation, I invite you to notice one joy that brings your spirit reprieve. And lean into that. Bring yourself close to that precious source and hold on to it as you invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. Thank you, and so may it be.